I first encountered American Prometheus around 2016. I got it from the library, read a couple hundred pages, and then my book was overdue, so I had to return it, and I listened to the last 500 or so pages via audiobook. And I found this long, exhaustive history of one guy and how he shaped modern geopolitics to be super fascinating and compelling, to the point that I would listen to the audiobook while jogging. And I just want to be clear about what a high bar that is. I desperately need a distraction from how much pain I'm in, so my audio is almost always reserved for music or the most engrossing of podcasts. And American Prometheus is the only audiobook that's met the high bar of distracting me from aerobic pain. I think that what most compelled me about the book is that J. Robert Oppenheimer truly is a fascinatingly tragic figure, and his work is some of the most consequential of the 20th century. There's a line from the movie where Matt Damon urgently says,
"How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?"
Which is a bit much, but also maybe not wrong. When I finished the book, I immediately thought, wow, this needs to be a movie, but probably more likely a miniseries, because this dude lived like 3 lifetimes and they're all worth their own movie. So around the fall of 2021, when I heard Christopher Nolan's next project is an Oppenheimer movie, I immediately thought, I wonder which part of Oppenheimer's life the movie will focus on, because clearly they wouldn't be able to fit all of the interesting aspects of his life into one movie. And I was wrong. Nolan pulled it off with flying colors, weaving the different eras of Oppenheimer's life on top of each other in a layered way that's true to Christopher Nolan's writing style. This is an absolute triumph of an adaptation on a screenplay level. It's coherent, exhaustive, and deeply satisfying. Before American Prometheus, I probably only knew 3 things about Robert Oppenheimer. 1, he was the father of the atomic bomb, though I wasn't quite sure what that meant. 2, his picture hung in Dennis Nedry's office in Jurassic Park. Put a pin in that. And 3, upon witnessing the Trinity test, he allegedly said, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." So that quote being one of the 3 things I knew about the guy, I was anticipating how that quote would be deployed in the movie. I cannot fucking believe how they first used that quote in this movie. I'm not saying it's bad, it's an interesting choice, but man is it a choice, and I cannot fucking believe that's how they did it. If you know, you know. I was very excited when Killian Murphy's casting was announced. He's been like 6th billed in so many Nolan movies, the Batman movies, Inception, Dunkirk, and I've always thought he was a really interesting actor. I loved him in Red Eye.
You tell the flight attendant and your dad dies.
And I'm not exaggerating when I say I think about this line read in Batman Begins like once a week.
The Batman.
So the prospect of him finally getting to lead a Nolan movie was very exciting to me. And he's absolutely sublime in the way he speaks, in the way he carries himself, and even in his look. Like, Killian Murphy has very striking features, and I never really once thought he looked anything like Robert Oppenheimer, who also had pretty striking features, but Killian Murphy just disappears into the guy. I know it's kind of trite how much the Academy loves to award physical transformations, and I guess this qualifies because he did lose a bunch of weight, but it's mostly just in his hair, in his eyes, and in his vibes. He disappears. Emily Blunt is here in what I like to call supporting actress mode. It's not a novel observation to say that many movies the Academy has historically honored have centered on great men of history. And in these stories, the female characters are often relegated to either stock supportive wife or stock antagonistic wife, and they're rarely given much to do. This kind of feels like that until it doesn't. Kitty Oppenheimer does get at least one pretty phenomenal scene. But beyond that one scene, and some brief but interesting backstory about her husband being killed in the Spanish Civil War, there's not a lot for her to do. But Emily Blunt certainly makes the most of it. She really elevates a largely thankless role, and she more than earned her Oscar nomination with Kitty's one phenomenal scene. Kinda weird this is Emily Blunt's first Oscar nomination. Before this movie, she'd been nominated for 5 Golden Globes and 3 SAG Awards. So she's been a mainstay in award season for years now, and has presumably been on the cusp of an Oscar nomination at least a few times, but this is the first time she's actually broken through. I really like Matt Damon in the mode he's in here. Grizzled, kind of a dick, but mostly amiable. He enters the movie and sparks the Assemble the Team montage, which is both very fun and very compelling. And after that, he's kind of the babysitter of the Manhattan Project for the military, the representative of the eventual owner of the bomb. So he's mostly an ally, but at times a little adversarial for Oppenheimer. But once Oppenheimer and the scientists hand over the bomb to Damon, his last scene with Oppenheimer is fairly ominous. And it's illuminating for how the rest of the movie will go, and illuminating about some unsaid aspects of how their relationship has been all along. Beyond Blunt and Damon, this is just a cadre of incredible supporting performances. David Krumholtz, Alden Ehrenreich, Deus Ex Rami Malek, Kenneth Branagh. Gary Oldman shows up for one scene and is incredible. And they sneak in Casey Affleck for one incredible scene where he is super, super scary while remaining super calm. Benny Safdie gave 3 of my favorite performances across movies and TV last year, and the 3 performances could not be more different. Between these 3, Licorice Pizza a couple years ago, and a small role in his own movie Good Time, he's becoming a really interesting actor. Unfortunately, this might be depriving us of some more Safdie Brothers movies in the short term, but not a horrible trade-off. Robert Downey Jr. is technically a supporting role, but he's also the lead / point of view character for a good chunk of the movie. And he's completely mesmerizing. Feels like this is the performance people have been waiting for from him for like 2 decades. And they're very excited to give him a well-deserved Oscar 31 years after his first nomination. I especially like his subdued performance in the first half. The way he explains what happened to Oppenheimer as if he were a mere humble narrator. And the way his performance maintains the mystery of why the confirmation committee is pestering him so much about Oppenheimer. When we first meet Louis Strauss, Alden Ehrenreich calls him Mr. Strauss. And he semi-curtly corrects him that it's Admiral Strauss.
Really, Mr. Strauss?
It's Admiral.
Yeah. Admiral Strauss.
A couple scenes later, we flash back to him meeting Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer calls him Mr. Strauss. And he, more demurely, says, it's Strauss.
Dr. Oppenheimer. An honor. Mr. Strauss. It's pronounced Strauss.
I think this shows a couple of things. His initial deference to Oppenheimer, and now 5 or 6 years later, he's got a bit more of an edge to him. It's good writing, and Downey really communicates a lot with his contrasting line reads of correcting his name. Despite the runtime, this is a deeply rich text that rewards multiple viewings, and that extends to the craft level. On like my 3rd viewing, I started to realize how much Ludwig Göransson's score is a big part of why the movie works, as is the editing by Jennifer Lane. The "Can you hear the music" sequence early on just rocks, and it's the earliest indication in the movie that we're in for a fucking treat. And that's all score and editing. And then the Trinity test is one of the most awe-inspiring and terror-inspiring sequences you'll ever see. Again, largely from the editing and score and sound design. I saw this in 70mm IMAX, jealous, and I kind of couldn't believe what I was seeing in the Trinity test. The only other time I remember being that awed in a theater was the storm scene in Mad Max Fury Road. And structurally, there are 2 separate framing devices, both of which are used to tell portions of the story in flashback. So there's like 4 timelines to keep track of. Oppenheimer in his security clearance hearing, and from there we flash back to Oppenheimer's life from college through building the bomb. And then there's also Admiral Strauss's confirmation hearing, and from there we flash back to various interactions between Strauss and Oppenheimer in the years after building the bomb. The mastery with which this is all kept on the rails is hard to overstate. The fact that this is even coherent is impressive. The fact that it's wildly compelling and propulsive is a miracle. This is 3 hours long, but it hums. It's thrilling, fast-paced, thought-provoking, and terrifying. Like I said at the top, J. Robert Oppenheimer truly is a fascinatingly tragic figure, and this movie plays dramatically like a great tragedy. David Krumholtz as Isidore Rabi declines Oppenheimer's offer to come work at Los Alamos because
you drop a bomb that falls on the just and the unjust. I don't wish the culmination of 3 centuries of physics to be a weapon of mass destruction.
Oppenheimer's response is that he's not sure we can be trusted with this bomb, but he knows the Nazis can't be. We have the benefit of hindsight and know that Germany was defeated before the first test of an atomic weapon. Oppenheimer spends the rest of his life, and much of this movie, expressing caution on the use of atomic weapons, if not outright regret for the role he played in their creation. Even if he doesn't say it outright, Oppie in the movie gives real, what do we do this all for vibes. And sure, he's only able to think that because this ultimately wasn't a race against the Nazis, it was a race against the Russians, but Framing the early scenes of Los Alamos as a race against the Nazis is crucial, and it really ups the tragedy of Oppenheimer's life. In Jurassic Park, Ian Malcolm says,
But your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Which is effectively the basis of like 70% of all science fiction. And from a bird's eye view, you might be tempted to apply that to Oppenheimer, particularly with the breakneck pace of the editing when Oppenheimer first signs on, builds the team, and builds Los Alamos. But there is no thinking whether or not he should. He thinks he's working to get a bomb before the Nazis, and he's right that Hitler with a nuclear arsenal would be catastrophic. What could be more noble than working to prevent that? But then it just doesn't go the way he thinks it's going to go. His initial reasons for getting into this work get complicated by the course of history, and he's left wondering if his attempts to save the world actually doomed the world. After the success of the Trinity test, Oppenheimer addresses a gymnasium full of exuberant, applauding people, and he begins to have haunting visions of these very people being decimated by the bomb he just helped create. And it is a wildly effective scene. It kind of builds to a close-up of a young woman who's smiling and applauding, but from Oppenheimer's hallucinating perspective, her skin is peeling off her face. Fun fact, or maybe horrifying fact, that woman is Christopher Nolan's real-life daughter, Little Nepetiz. With her casting, Nolan is making Oppenheimer's horror at what he hath wrought a little personal. Stepping back a bit, there's a very clear reading of this movie wherein Oppenheimer is a stand-in for Nolan himself. Two men at the very top of their field who, in order to create something substantial, must work within a larger system. For Oppenheimer, it's the US Armed Forces. For Christopher Nolan, it's Warner Brothers. And for both men, their creations got away from them a little bit and were used in ways that might well destroy the world. For Oppenheimer, that's nuclear holocaust. For Nolan, it's the fact that his Batman movies were a catalyst for comic book movies to become a dominant force in the movie-making industry and suck up all the studio filmmaking resources for 2 decades. In some ways, this movie is Christopher Nolan apologizing for striking the match that led us to the bomb of Madame Web. It's almost a bit poetic that in 2009, the Academy reversed 65 years of precedent in the Best Picture category and jumped from 5 to 10 nominees the year after The Dark Knight was shut out of Best Picture. And now Nolan is certain to win his first Oscar, and several Oscars, for the movie that can be read as his mea culpa for how much that movie changed the industry, arguably for the worse. Poetic or not, I think every Oscar this movie wins, whether it's 5 or 8 or 10, they're well-deserved. This is a staggering work on all levels, for cinephiles and non-cinephiles alike. Yes, I saw this 3-hour movie 3 times, but seems like fucking everybody saw this and loved this. My wife goes to the movies maybe 3 times a year, and she saw this in IMAX. My parents watched it twice. My father-in-law's review was Poppy like Oppie. Not only is this the best movie of 2023, I think it might well be the best movie of the decade so far. I don't know what's come out since 2020 that could top it. I know the Academy often misses, and their choices sometimes seem strange in hindsight, but they're nailing it this year. This is one of the greats.